为台中市这个方向，所以为台中市的到台北的话，它在大体上号量上头，猛动浅中色讲台一打过来，
大理小区是中心
左手边那种。
Meeting starts. President Liu, please ring the opening bell.
Good afternoon, everyone.
Rotarians, please all rise for the forward test. The forward test of the things we think, say, or do. First,
Is it true?
second,
Is it fair or concern?
third,
Will it be well their friendships?
fourth.
Will it be beneficial to all concerned?
Thank you. Please be seated. PPR, please state us succinctly.
I instead of
PPR. Oh, you said
Yes.
Rotary song.
Okay, let's sing the Rotary song. R-O-T-A-R-Y, that spells Rotary. R-O-T-A-R-Y is long on land and sea. From north to south, from east to west, he profits most who serve us best. R-O-T-A-R-Y, that spells Rotary.
Thank you, PPR. Introduction of visiting Rotarians and honorable guests. And we have Rotarian Max to introduce our guest today.
M. You say Max. Oh, it's Max. Oh,讲名。啊，不是讲你要介绍。
不是啦。
哦，OK。
Fellowship.
OK。
Good afternoon, everyone.
Good afternoon.
Today, we are so happy to have Mr.翁松燃教授as our speaker. And Mrs. Ong Karen is also here. And then we have 王志少先生 他是从国中党东南社出任。And then we have their old guests, their old experts. 林婵娟小姐，裴传瑞先生，小姐 ，sorry。
Rotarians, Max
wife.
Sorry.
He is also Max.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Very good. And then we have 李明宪先生。李明宪先生他也是以前立法委员，现在也是非常有名的艺术雕刻家。欢迎。另外还有卓良珍小姐。
哎，弄。卓良珍
2次失误，请
留成艺术，
忘记带老花眼镜出来。And then, we have 小姐，我介绍。And then last one is 刘耀华先生。Thank you, enjoy and have a great time.
Thank you, Max. And we are going to sing a song for our Rotarian Max from 东南社. PPR, please.
Peter, are you Rotarian? 你们现在基本上都是福伦吗？福伦员？哦，这样已经不还好，哦，不能是 ，OK。好，我发现。Well, let's song. Yes, all Rotary we greet you. Oh, yes, all Rotary we greet you. We want you to feel our friendship is real. We are glad you are here today. So take back home a bit of cheer. Regards from all the fellows here. And one once more, you are here, our Lord. Come again, Rotarian. Come again.
Welcome, Max, and thank you, PP Pat. Next, President's time.
Good afternoon, our fellow Rotarians, and we have many distinguished guests here today. And I think we're here. You are all here, and including myself, we're all here mainly for Professor Wong's speech. We're very honorable to have him here with us and give us a very newsworthy and it's a big event, big talk that affects probably everyone in this room and around a lot of people in both U.S. and China. And Taiwan is caught in a very unique position, so we'd like to hear some of his wisdom words. Just a couple of things I want to share with everyone. We got this note from PP Juice. I believe it's in the line chat group, and just want to make a quick announcement that his mother has passed away this week, and since she's 90 plus years old, so the family's gonna maintain a very low key throughout the ceremony. And if you're interested, I think we have a board meeting after today's meeting, but most of the board members will try to get together and pay our condolences to his family. She was suffering dementia. She was hospitalized in and out several times this year already. So it's kind of it's just a path that we ultimately will take, but pay our respect basically and remembrance for her family, for his family. Okay. And just want to make an announcement for our international service next year. This is a joint project we are doing with Natural Science Museum, and for the what do we call it? For the new immigrants, for the new immigrants family, we're taking them to an outing trip to the Preservation Park, Jusan area, and we'll be next page. And we'll be getting professional tour guide from the Natural Science Museum professors there, and they will give us a very interesting tour guide. So if you want to spend the night, because the rooms are limited, so we need to make a reservation way early in advance to basically for the trip. So do register with Anne, and if you cannot stay overnight, we also have a one-day outing, what do you call it, agenda for the trip. So do let us know and mark that on your calendar so we can be ready. Okay, that's all.
Thank you, President Liu. And for all board members, please reserve your time after today's meeting for our January board meeting. And next week, yes, we will have a community service served by Rotarian Joey. Joey, would you like to come up to promote your community service and welcome everybody to join you to Boai Elementary School?
Is it your last time?
Yeah, this is the last time for this semester, so help. I would like to invite everybody if we can go upstairs to the mountain and play with the kids. They were really cute, okay? And hope to see you guys there.
This is the last chance to go up to Boai Elementary School with Joey, and we can listen to how he's really interested English story speaking. And next is our main program of today, and we have PB app to introduce our speaker.
Thank you. Hello, President Jimmy and distinguished guests and fellow Rotarian. It's my pleasure to introduce you our speaker today. Before introduction of Dr. Wong, I would like to share with you about my friend. They all are Dr. Wong's fans, and they have relationship with his hometown, Salu. 那个 Rotarian Max is from Salu, and his wife all together, and Dr. Zhou also born in Salu. 卓大夫是很有名的精神科医师and another fans is Mr. Li Mingxian, is a sculptor 很有名的那个，他是那个翁教授的粉丝专程来听他的演讲。还有那个我的好朋友Miss Olivia Lin her husband is one of my best friend, Mr. Lai. And I'm now going to introduce you. Dr. Thomas Liu. He is also living in Salu. 也是那个 Dr. Wong 的粉丝，专程来听他的演讲。Because some of my friends may not familiar about my English, so sometimes I would aid in Taiwanese. Okay. Dr. Wing is a native Taiwanese and a naturalized American citizen. 翁教授是台湾本土出生然后现在是美国的公民。He was born as third son of Mr. Wong Sui Seng in Salu, Taichung, Taiwan. 他是那个翁水生先生的第三个公子He obtained his LLB from National Taiwan University. When he was studying in the law school, he stayed at the same dormitory with Li Ao, who was history department student. 他跟李敖是同一个宿舍的我不知道有没有同一间同房And one day, Li Ao took a lot of sleeping pill, want to kill himself. 李敖有一次要自杀了，他就吃很多的那个安眠药。And because he was stung by his girlfriend, but he was found by Dr. Wing, so Dr. Wing took him to the hospital and saved his life. 这个可能很多人都不知道。Doctor, do you know that Mrs. Wing the story? You don't know. You didn't know. He didn't tell you. Okay. He's a good guy. Dr. Wing also obtained his MS and PhD degree of political science from the University of Wisconsin, Madison, USA. 他的那个 PhD 是在那个 Wisconsin 的Madison 分校的大学得到的，他得到的是政治学的博士学位。In 1964 to 65, he taught at Miami University, Ohio, and then transferred to Wright State University, Ohio, from 1965 to 72. Many of you may not born yet at that time, right? From 1972 to 74, he was invited by Chinese University, Hong Kong, to be professor of political science and administration department. He became the dean of the department in 1980. 他后来到香港中文大学去做教授，后来做了系主任。Before his retirement in 1999 from the Chinese University, he had been Reformation Council member and advisor of Hong Kong British government and the government of Hong Kong Special Administration Region. 他曾经在香港担任很多要职，包括做那个改革委员会的委员，还有顾问职港英政府跟香港特别行政区都做过，都担任过所以他的资历非常丰富。He was also invited by President Lee Teng-hui's government as advisory committee member of Mainland Affairs, Executive Yuan and National Unification Committee member. 他后来被李登辉政府邀请回来台湾担任那个陆委会的委员，行政院陆委会委员，还有国家统一委员会的委员。In 2000 to 2006, during the presidency of Chen Shui-bian, he was invited as national policy advisor to the president. 陈水扁总统曾经邀请他有6年的时间，2000年到2006年，2006年做国策顾问国策顾问。Dr. Wen is a talent scholar， 他是非常有才华学养都很丰富的教授。He has a good command of Mandarin, Taiwanese, Cantonese, English and Japanese。他会讲台湾话、广东话当然是华语Cantonese and 英语，还有日本话He has been lecturer, visiting professor, research fellow, external examiner, and external assessors of many famous international universities and institutes around the world, such as USA, Hong Kong, Taiwan, China, UK, Australia, and Japan. 他的学历非常的丰富这个你们有听过叫做external examiner 吗？听过吗 ？external examiner 还有 external assessor。因为我的儿子现在在大学读研究所，所以我跟他那个讲话的时候才知道什么叫做外聘的外来的那个这个教授要审查的如果你要读博士班，他不但本校的老师，外校的教授也要聘来审查所以这个就是 external assessors and external examiner 所以他是非常有名，被很多的国际知名的第一名这里大学骗去做这里外聘的教授去审查足侪这里博士学位的人。Dr. Wing has won the highest award from the Koda University, Japan. 日本他也去日本教学过，所以日本的创价大学、创价大学有颁发给伊一个上界高点的这个奖章创价大学He was the writer and compiler of many books, documents and papers. 我今日可能无时间将伊的著作拢讲出来，若无可能伊就免演讲伊的叫做著作等身伊的著作亲像伊的人安尼遐悬足济。伊有其中上早有一本册我知影叫做 Peking's UN Policy Continuity and Changing 就是 You can still buy the book from the Amazon 他现在还在卖在 Amazon 的书架里面还有就是说北京对联合国的政策Mrs. Wayne, Dr. Wayne's beautiful wife, has come to Taiwan recently. We are very delighted to have her to be with us today. 我们很欢喜Mrs. Wayne 今天来出席。They have a son who is also married. Dr. Wayne is going to retire from 15 year services at Jinan University, and to be back with Mrs. Wei to the United States for good after this semester. Am I right? We thank them for their coming and talk, and we wish them health, happiness, and having good time all the way home. Let's give Dr. Win a big hand.
I need to use a computer, so
Yeah,
I'll
yeah,
put it
yeah.
from here. Thank you very much. It is a great pleasure to be able to come here today. Your invitation indeed is very special, and I appreciate very much this opportunity to be with you. I have picked for myself a topic which is way too big. And since the time allotted is only a half hour or so, I'm afraid what I can do is only to give you some kind of an outline with much of the details not filled. And hopefully, if we have time for a little bit of question and answer at that time, we can deal with some of those. My topic I have chosen deals with Donald Trump, the United States President, Xi Jinping, the President of the People's Republic of China, and the future of Taiwan. I have 4 propositions to make in this connection. The first is that Taiwan's fate is tied to 2 very peculiar external factors, namely cross-strait relations and the China-USA rivalry. When I say peculiar, of course, I meant to say no other country have similar things to have to deal with, but we are unfortunately tied to that peculiar situation. Secondly, I propose to say that Taiwan actually occupies a very strategic position in the Washington-Beijing rivalry today, and that has something to do with the topic. Proposition 3 is to say that in this Trump and Xi Jinping rivalry, Taiwan can be a partner of either of them, a pawn of the United States, a battlefield for both, and possibly a prize of China. How that is so, of course, is a complicated question, and yet I'm afraid I'm going to have to skip much of it. Proposition 4, which is a key, or the message I have to offer today, is to say that the so-called Thucydides trap, which is very much in the news lately, I propose to say that it can be and will be probably be avoided when you carefully analyze the conditions. And because there's not likely to be that war between China and the United States, because we can possibly avoid that, there is some ground for us to be relatively optimistic. And therefore I say an optimist will bet on the status quo for the foreseeable future. Status quo, in this case, I meant to say the current uneasy relationship between mainland China and Taiwan. That particular status quo, that's what I'm talking about. Let me move on to proposition 1, speaking about the determinants, the factors that affects Taiwan's future. When we speak of a country or a state's future or its fate, its destiny, scholars tend to say that there are fixed elements and there are flexible elements. Among the fixed, of course, things like the territorial site. If you're a small country, of course you cannot play the role of a big one or a hegemon or something like that. Your location, and in the case of Taiwan, location turned out to be strategic and important. And of course, history, something like this. These are given. You cannot wish it to be different. You cannot wish Taiwan to become bigger. It doesn't. All right, these are fixed elements which you can do nothing about. Then the flexible elements, economic, political, military, cultural, etc., all these are conditions and choices which one can do something about. And scholars in the field of foreign policy analysis generally utilize a framework for analysis that incorporates two parts, capabilities and will. Your foreign policy can be effective, can be influential if you have the right capabilities and if you have the will to pursue it. Capabilities lately has been summarized in the United States and other places by a number of famous scholars such as Joseph Nye of Harvard in terms of something called hard power, soft power, smart power, and so forth. Now, I have no time to explain these things, so I have to go on assuming that you know what they are. In terms of will, which is much more subjective, we're speaking of the will of the government concerned and the people in that country. These I shall come back to a little bit later. Now, for Taiwan, the peculiar conditions that we are talking about, the mainland China-Taiwan cross-strait relations. Here, we are speaking about Beijing's ambition of reunification. And you know that a few days ago, on January 1st this year, Xi Jinping took the opportunity to pronounce yet another message about Taiwan, and that has been in the news, analyzed and discussed by many, many people around the world. Many are pessimistic because of that speech. I happen not to share that particular view, and I'll try to explain some of it. Beijing's position, Beijing's policy, its stances, what it does or what it does not do, all affect Taiwan's development. Practically every aspect of Taiwan's development, domestic and foreign, in one way or another, are not free from what Beijing can do to influence. That is peculiar to Taiwan. I think there are smaller countries in the world that have similar conditions to worry about, but not to the extent that Taiwan is, because we have a particularly big power whose intention is to swallow up Taiwan. In the China-USA rivalry, we're speaking of a triangle in which Taiwan occupies the short side. In this triangle, we can see that development over the years have been influential and interesting and affects Taiwan directly or indirectly so. American-Chinese relationship, if you very briefly summarize it, you can say that for the period 49 to 72, basically it's a history of enmity. This is a period when anti-communism and the Cold War dominate the world scene, and China is seen in that light as a communist power, and the United States had a policy of containing China. Containment was the story of the day. In 1972, however, because of Sino-Soviet rift and American intention to want to unite China together to counter, to fight against Russia, Soviet Union in those days, we found that the United States and China come together through Nixon at the time of the Shanghai Communique in 1972, and that was followed by the establishment of formal relationship in 1979, and so you see that development. The establishment of relationship then led on to a period in which the American language, key words, was make China a responsible stakeholder. That is to say, if we help China develop economically and becomes therefore a freer, prosperous country, then the people of China themselves would ask for democratization. And the United States policy was pushed in that direction. Unfortunately, it didn't happen. By the time the Cold War ended in 1991, what we found was that there was a China becoming prosperous, all right, but it is not opening up politically. In the area of politics, China says we have our own model. The China model has made us rich, powerful. Why should we follow the American example? Instead, the Chinese want to peddle their China model, and you see what has happened since that time. We speak very much of so-called one road, one belt, one road today. Later, I will be speaking about Xi Jinping's 2 dreams and 2 centennials and all that story. Okay, so what you see is that this development is affecting the situation very much. And when Trump came into power in 2016, Xi Jinping has already led China onto a road which is different from the previous period of trying to make China a responsible stakeholder. We now see that China will be a stakeholder not of the American model, not of world values, 所谓普世价值, universal values, none of those. The language you hear being peddled in China is 我不搞，七不讲, something of that nature. Well, again, I have no time to get into the details, but this is what we have to deal with. That makes Taiwan's position very difficult, and yet I say there's one aspect that is going to affect Taiwan's future, which is worth looking at time and again. When we are in difficulty, let's keep at least this point in mind. When I say this, I'm talking about what Taiwan means to China, what Taiwan means to the United States. To China, of course, China wants national unification. They're worried about all kinds of things. Of course, the tradition of grand unity, 大一统, is deep in the Chinese mind. Whoever becomes a leader of China, he cannot afford to violate that. No Chinese leader, particularly people like Xi Jinping, want to be known as the person who is responsible for losing a piece of Chinese territory. That is very strongly Chinese view, more so than other countries. And yet, I'm trying to suggest to you that the geographical location of Taiwan makes Taiwan very important to both the United States and to China. To the Chinese, this is a forward base. If Taiwan becomes a part of China, Beijing controls it, then Beijing is in a position to use Taiwan as a forward base to enter into the Pacific, to deal with the rest of the world. This particular strategic position cannot be underestimated in terms of its significance, much more than the so-called Nanhai and so forth. And if you speak of this point, you think of the American way of thinking about Taiwan, you have to realize that the chain of containment against China, all the way from Korea, Japan, down through Taiwan and to Luzon, Philippines, and so forth. Taiwan is in the middle of it. And if you break this Taiwan point in that chain, American containment becomes ineffective. And so, therefore, both sides must, in my opinion, think of Taiwan as strategically important to their grand strategy. And that has to be in the picture. Not only that, but I think it's fair for me to assert that Taiwan's economic prowess, technological prowess, is nothing to poo-poo about. It is very significant. I have heard some government officials recently speaking about Taijidian and the chips that they make and what it means to the world's computer technology. We are in the age of IT, of artificial intelligence, AI, and so forth. And in this period, what Taiwan produces, what Taiwan controls, what Taiwan's in that chain able to do is quite significant. Many of you probably remember when Taiwan had the earthquake, the Puli Qiji earthquake in 1999?
1999.
In that year?
Yes.
Because Taiwan had the earthquake, the entire world computer technology was, for a period of at least 2 weeks, in a situation of uncertainty. Taiwan alone has that kind of prowess. And so this continues to be of importance. I think China, I may take half a minute here. China, unique among all the communist countries, was able to reform and become a successful remaining communist power in the world. Why? I contend that having Taiwan, having Hong Kong, having overseas Chinese made it possible for China to transform from the communist collective planned economy into what they are practicing today, which is capitalist. Albeit it's state capitalism, nonetheless it is capitalist. And they're able to do that transformation because there's Taiwan, because there's Hong Kong, because there's overseas Chinese. They speak the same language, they have some kind of connection, they're able to utilize this, and that has produced what you see in China today. And that's continuing. We have more than 1 million Taiwanese businessmen living in China today, and they're coming and going continuously, making tremendous influence. Taiwan remains, in this sense, a very important place for China as well. Xi Jinping has said, and in his recent speech, peaceful unification and one country, two systems remains China's policy towards Taiwan. And the so-called 1992 consensus, 九二共识, is key. That's the bottom line. You cannot refuse that. All right, we see in the newspaper in the last few days exchanges between Xi Jinping and Tsai Ing-wen over this point. Well, that being the case, we have to take this very seriously. Xi Jinping says the military option remains the same. That is to say, all means are still open, and China would not admit or would not promise not to use force. This is the stick that they keep. And at the same time, they push out the carrots, stick and carrots strategy. The carrots are the so-called 31 measures, 31项惠台措施, in favor of Taiwan's businessmen or students who want to study in China and so forth. I take this opportunity to explain very briefly Xi Jinping's two dreams and his so-called two centennials. 两个中国梦, 两个100年. All right, they are tied together. The so-called two centennials, first one is the centennial for the establishment of the Communist Party of China in 1921. That means in 2 years. 2021, it will be the first 100 years. By that time, China, Xi Jinping said, and this is he said many years ago, China wants to become a 小康社会, a society of relative comfort. Which means many of the people who are below the poverty line will be lifted. And indeed, Xi Jinping goes to the UN and boasts that all the records of success in lifting people from under the poverty line, 70% of that happened in China. China can claim something like that. He speaks of the first dream in that fashion, and he pretty much can claim success in that connection. His second dream ties to the second centennial, which is the establishment of the PRC in 1949. That means by the year 2049, China will what? Will become a strong power, a power to reckon with on the world stage, meaning China would not have to, by then, always be subject to abuse by a big power, a hegemon like the United States. That's what he wanted to say. Whether he succeeds or not, that's a separate question, but that's his dream, so-called dream. In this connection, Taiwan fits in some ways in Xi Jinping's scheme, and how one reads that is of some importance. On the side of on the American side, I consider that they have also a number of important considerations about Taiwan. The one China policy has been in practice since 1979, when the two sides established formal relations. There are 3 communiques, the Taiwan Relations Act, the 6 assurances offered by Reagan, and the most recent Taiwan Travel Act. In fact, that's not the most recent. That's last year, February. This year, January, this month, Washington has just adopted yet another act favoring, if not directly, indirectly, Taiwan, which is to promise to give Taiwan reliable military sale. If Taiwan needs it, the United States would be supplying Taiwan's military needs regularly, or something of that nature, which is an indication that Trump government wants to make sure that Taiwan would not feel so threatened that they give up and lean over to the Chinese side. This is American way of thinking, all right? They oppose, the American position has always been, since the time of Bush, to oppose unilateral change of the Taiwan Strait status quo. 反对单方改变台海现状. That's American policy. I've already spoken about Taiwan's strategic location. The advance of democracy is also, as many of you probably know and accept, that Taiwan represents a successful Asian democracy, and that is significant for the United States, who wants to push the American values, the universal value, democracy around the world. And Taiwan, in that regard, has many supporters in American Congress. You can see that. Americans also are wary that if they don't support Taiwan, some allies of the United States would say, hey, Americans are not reliable. And that, to the American Congress, some of them anyway, is important. So American considerations are such. Trump, since he assumed power, he has said that he still holds on to one China policy, but he made it happen that Taiwan Travel Act comes on, and he promises regularized arms sales. But I'm sorry to say I have to add at the end that for Trump, this is, I don't have the time to explain too much about this man. I can give another lecture, a whole lecture of an hour about him, which probably won't be too much new to you. Anyway, Trump is a guy who is, as people say, a businessman running a government as if he's running a business. And in that sense, he, when necessary, when there is a profit to be made, when there is a loss to be avoided, we cannot count on him always to be standing firm in support of Taiwan. Therefore, we hear many talks that he treats Taiwan as a pawn. Maybe, maybe not. We have to wait and see. My proposition 3 is to say these things. Now, I think this is a part that can be very convoluted, and I propose that we do not give it too much time today, because I really don't have the time to do so. But you probably understand what this all means. As a partner, mainly it's economic partners that we are speaking of. Taiwan is not to be poo-pooed, small as it is. We are number 14, 13, 12, in that range, in the world as an economic strength. Not small at all, quite significant. US would use Taiwan as a pawn when useful, and we have to keep that in mind. That possibility always exists. And that's natural, almost. You have to accept that possible natural development. As a battlefield of the two, we're speaking of Thucydides' trap. In that case, if there is a war, Taiwan could well be, some people suggest, could well be the trigger point. The war may start right here. We hope that's not the case, but there's such talk, right? And China, of course, would want to claim China as a prize. I propose to skip that and go straight to proposition 4 about Thucydides' trap. I suspect that many of you, I mean, this is such a distinguished group, I would imagine that I don't need to explain too much about what Thucydides' trap is. But very briefly, let me just give you this much. It is the Greek historian, and some compare him to Sima Qian. Really, he is the first best objective historian of the Western society. He wrote about the Peloponnesian War between Sparta and Athens in roughly 200, 300 BC, in that period. And in that book, there are many creative things that we learn from it, and one of them is to say this, that when a rising power challenges a hegemonic situation, it may or it will lead to a war. Harvard University's Graham Allison, who's very famous for his studies on Cuban War, collected data with his group of scholars, 16 cases in world history where such a challenge took place. And they found in their studies that 12 of them indeed led to war. But I'm proposing today that that war, nonetheless, can be avoided and will probably be avoided because we are in a nuclear age. When you speak of war, you cannot be comfortable that you will not, if anything, accidentally get into a nuclear war. And that means no survivors, no winners of that situation. So people will avoid, big powers like the United States and China will avoid war. Certainly Russia and the United States avoided war in the Cold War period for similar reasons. We speak of MAD, M-A-D, mutual assured destruction, which is the reason for avoiding war. We think that continues in this period. And I think that the entanglement economically of these powers, we're speaking of that triangle, China, US, and Taiwan, we are all three of us very much messed up economically. Your economy is influenced by mine, mine by his, and this relationship make it almost impossible for one to ignore the other. And to fight the economic war, trade war between China and the United States, you must have read many, many analyses that says Trump will bring lots of difficult situations into the United States. And the first effect is that American goods will all become more expensive and common consumers will have to pay the price. That sort of things. That's the entanglement, the interrelationship that we're speaking of. That is going to prevent leaders from talking about war without second, third thinking. And we have other elements that may be the buffer. Other countries, other elements will come in to interfere and say, no, don't have a war. We don't want you to fight a war. Your war is going to affect us. It will become Third World War. We don't want it. That sort of things. And you see that recent developments, for instance, India. How can you clearly delineate India's role in the world? Very difficult, because it's siding with this side one day and siding with the other another day, and when you ask them for their final position, they won't give it to you clearly. And I think, artificial intelligence, AI, and what's to come in the next period of world development is going to produce items and ways that will influence our thinking, correcting many of what we already have. And for these reasons, I think avoidance is possible. The status quo in the Taiwan states, I'm trying to say, if we allow ourselves, we can afford to be somewhat optimistic. And I say so in terms of capability and of will. In terms of capability, very briefly, I say the United States still dominates and is not ready to yield. This is very clear. If you give the statistical figures, I don't have it on hand, but the military prowess between China and the United States, it's very far. Still, the distance is still very far between them. Oh, sorry. Bring it down to the bottom. Okay, proposition 4, right about 18 or something. 19.
Yeah, that's right. Second.
China is not only no match, but China is slowing down. You know that China has all kinds of internal troubles. They are famous today. They're in the news today for the concentration camp, the Gulag in Xinjiang province, and lots of criticisms about that. Not just that, but consumer index is going down, very clearly going downward. And internal troubles, recently, I may relate this, 2 days ago, I think, 2 days ago, a Peking University professor published some kind of article saying that capitalist way is the way to go. And his article was removed promptly. This is not the only case. There is a fellow who writes for New York Times Chinese version, Deng Yiwen. He has several articles in which he criticize Deng Xi Jinping for what he's doing, and all kinds of internal voice that people inside China cannot read or hear about, but we outside can. And these things are continuous and becoming more and more frequent and quite significant, in my opinion. In other words, China's internal weakness, the Chinese people cannot hear or see, but outsiders and the leaders know about them. And I say Taiwan is not altogether helpless. With lots of arms we purchase from the United States and we develop ourselves, we should be able to resist any initial attempt by China to take Taiwan by force. And if we are able to withstand that kind of things for a week, 2 weeks, we are in a good position to make it too costly for China. I submit further in terms of will, and this is my final frame here. Washington is not ready to yield. China remains cautious. More importantly, I contend, and this is subjective, this is my personal view. Okay, I continue to think that China, Xi Jinping, really is not now thinking of taking Taiwan. Not to take Taiwan is more profitable, more beneficial, less troublesome, less costly. And for the foreseeable future, I continue to think that Xi Jinping really does not want to push the immediate taking of Taiwan. Now I say so, if you analyze the speech he has given a few days on January 1st, about the 40th anniversary of that message to Taiwan compatriots of 1979. If you analyze that article, you find that he repeats peaceful unification time and again. He has 5 points to make. Each point, carefully, he adds the word peaceful into it. It's a clear indication to me that Xi Jinping really would not want to avoid using military force to take Taiwan now. So he speaks of unification, which must be done, but we'll do so peacefully. Peacefully means we have to create the conditions necessary for peaceful unification. And there's going to be quite a long period of time that is going to be China's policy. China is going to be too busy to deal with other problems, including domestic problems, for the foreseeable future. Taiwan people clearly favor status quo, and we have said this time and again to China, and Tsai Ing-wen did so. The point is, many Chinese inside mainland China speak the same language. Status quo is good. Status quo is favorable. And finally, I say Hong Kong experience discouraged Beijing from taking Taiwan too soon. Hong Kong story is in itself yet another long lecture. And I lived in Hong Kong 20 odd years. I'm qualified to run for chief executive in terms of law. But the Hong Kong story is one of maldigestion. I know there are many doctors today here. It's a case of bad digestion for China. So China is suffering in many significant ways because they thought they have Hong Kong taken back and everything is on course, the one country, two systems works fine, and so forth. It's not so. It's not. Economically, Hong Kong is still performing very well, but injection from China has been significant as well in that score. At any rate, what I'm trying to say is this. If little Hong Kong causes such maldigestion, what if China swallows Taiwan? As the Taiwan you know becomes a part of China, and China, in spite of one country, two systems, have to deal with Taiwan's internal resistance, reactions, even opposition against them. What would China have to invest in order to quell the Taiwan problem? That's too difficult. I am therefore on the side of the optimist and proposing that in the foreseeable future, Taiwan's future will probably remain pretty much the status quo. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you, Professor Wong, for the very fantastic speech. Is there any question for Professor Wen? Still.
Thank you, Professor Wen, for sharing the insightful information. Would that be fair to say that your position is that to remain status quo is the best leverage for Taiwan at this moment? Or is there anything you can advise our President Tsai before the next election? What should she do?
I believe our President Tsai Ing-wen has received many good advice from all sorts of people from all sides. She won't miss one from me. But what Tsai Ing-wen has done, and particularly in response to Xi Jinping's speech, is to say, I stand firm. We stand firm. Not only that, Tsai Ing-wen's position is to say, we want to uphold Taiwan's, or Republic of China, Taiwan's sovereignty. The word sovereignty comes out directly, clearly in her speech. Now this is a very important point because I'm a student of international law. And I know that when a place, a political unit says we are a sovereign unit, we have sovereignty, that's independence. So if Beijing or Xi Jinping or anyone dealing with a question wants to be difficult, they can say that's tantamount to declaring independence because you say you're a sovereign state. And if you have already declared independence, then according to the statute on anti-national division, 反分裂国家法, or something like that, if you go to that, Article 8 of that particular law says the government should take necessary action to deal with such a situation. That article specifies some 3 conditions by which Beijing authorities can take action against Taiwan, or something like that. So if you think in the worst possible way in that direction, we already have created a condition for Beijing to take action, to use force. If Beijing wants to use force, they don't need any other excuse. That's enough. And yet, you have seen that in spite of that being repeated by our officials, Tsai Ing-wen and Chen Ming-tong and other officials, 外交部长 and so forth, time and again, speaking of sovereignty we want to preserve and protect, they have not chosen to interpret that to mean declaration of independence and to take action against us. Right? Yes. Implied in that is their clear option. They choose not to. And why do they choose not to? That's my point. You have reason to think about it.
President Liu?
I know we're running out of time, but I would like to ask another question. I want to go back to the U.S. and China relationship, and I think, in my personal opinion, pretty much at war. We're in modern day. I think U.S. dominating the world through its economic and financial powers. So I think U.S. is pretty much at war with China already, or just not physical war. But my question is, both countries have a slightly different leadership or power system. What do you think will happen if U.S. gets a different leader in 2020? Because it's coming up very soon, and we're seeing these couple days the U.S.-China talk as they seem to be reaching some sort of compromise, and many of them are saying maybe elections coming up next year, the pressure is shifting back to U.S. side or shifting back to Trump's side.
For Trump, he has a lot in his mind, including possibility of impeachment. And the new Congress that the lower house, the House of Representatives, that after the last elections have become democratically controlled by the Democratic Party, is likely to start certain processes, including impeachment against Trump in the next 2 years. There's still a possibility that it won't be 2020, but before that, still that possibility here. And we all know why Trump, this guy, is in this trouble. He asked for it himself, but he is, in spite of himself, that way. Trump is a narcissist. He loves himself too much. He lives in illusory world in many ways. I know everything. Nobody knows this better than I. That's Trump, right? Trump thinks that he has done the best job of all presidents throughout history. That's Trump. That kind of a person in charge of the United States policy. He shuts down the government because he wants to build a wall against immigrants and so forth. But that's not the opinion of the majority of the people in the United States. So what you're looking at is a case of internal difficulties in the United States, which the Americans themselves have to sort out. And in that process of trying to sort that out, I think there will be domestic crisis of one type or another. The worst is impeachment, which is going to turn the country upside down in quite a significant way. All right, that's Trump. Xi Jinping is also in serious difficulty. We don't see it because their control of the media is quite efficient, effective. Xi Jinping, since he assumed power in 2012, he has removed constitutional limitation of his terms. He has made himself, I don't know how many hats he has, 20 hats easily, okay? Used to be when the 7 members of the standing committee appears on a stage, they line up, Xi Jinping in the middle. Today, that's no longer the case. You notice that? Xi Jinping alone in the front, the other 6 stands behind him. What does that mean? This is called Xi Jinping core, 习核心. And this, behind it, is so-called 绝对忠诚, absolute loyalty, which is the current campaign, internal campaign. Officials are feeling the pressure of having to fall in line to say, yes, I support the Xi Jinping, 核心, the core, and so forth. That is what appears. What's behind is that the economy is slowing down. The real estate price in particular has dropped 20% maybe, and lots of people are waiting to see what will happen next. And internet control, though effective, still inspire youngsters who wants to find a niche, some way to escape that control. And when things go wrong, can Xi Jinping really say, I alone am the leader, I take the power, I take the responsibility? Would that be the case? I submit to you that there will be internal turmoil of one type or another, because the intellectuals do not buy the whole set that Xi Jinping is peddling today. And therefore, we have lots to watch, but there's a veil, there's a curtain, and we cannot see through clearly of what's happening inside China. And yet we know it's boiling somewhere inside there. This is my reading of the situation. So, I don't know, in 2 years, the world may look very different from what we see today. 2 years, I'm talking about, in terms of possible leadership change or leadership adjustment in these 2 countries. And that's going to affect a lot of the world affairs. We don't even touch something like Brexit, okay? Anyway, this is the kind of things that I see. And for that sort of reasons, therefore, I submit that what you see is right. But I disagree with a little bit with the war point that you're making. The United States and China are trying very, very, very hard to avoid that war. The effort they make to avoid that war is more significant than the war itself, to me. Okay, and so we have different readings, and we'll see how your reading and my reading lead to. In 2 years, we'll have an answer to that.
Thank you, Dr. Wen. Please remain on the stage to let us to present a gift to you.
Do a token of appreciation. Thank you very much. Thank you.
After this speech, I feel safer to be a resident in Taiwan.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you.
必秀了，没关系。不用秀没关系。哦。
Okay, attendance report. Now we have PB Path to give us the attendance today.
Let me have today's attendance report. We have 24 Rotarians and 1 visiting Rotarian and 8 guests. So today's attendance rate is 72%. Thank you. Yeah.
Thank you, PB Path. And Surgeon report. Now we have PB Skate.
Thank you. President. Hello everyone. Surgeon Adams report. We have four attention. The first from our visiting Rotarian, Taichung Gangdong Nansen Max. Thank you. And the second from our PP head. Thanks to Dr. Wong coming and giving speech. Best wishes to you. Thank you, Ed. And third from our Secretary Jimmy. Thank you, Dr. Wong, for the informative speech, and hope we will have a chance to have you back to talk more. Thank you, Jimmy. And the last from our President Lu. Maintain status quo is great. Thank you, Professor Wong, for your insightful talk. Thank you, Lu. Yeah. Maintain status quo. Yeah. The thing never change is keeping change. So it's really hard to maintain the status quo. Yeah, after hearing the speech, every time I talk about politics and or the future of Taiwan, it's so sad and so serious. Yeah. Knowing that our fate or our future is so much uncertainty and not controlled by ourselves. Yeah, not so good, not so comfortable. So. As routine, I should have a joke, but I don't have the mood to talk about joke. Actually, I didn't prepare any joke. Thank you everyone.
Be positive, PB Skin. Okay, next week we will have Zhang Youren先生to talk about my life after. And on January 20th, that's our big program of this year. It will be our 30th charter ceremony. So please, everyone, please join us. President Lu.
Thank you, everyone, and thank you, Dr. Wen, again for your speech today. I think he needs at least this is like a full semester of a class that he can talk for at least like a few more hours. But thank you again for coming, Mr. and Mrs. Wen. Thank you.
Hey, Nico.